Welcome everyone, I'm Dale and this is Cinema Historia. This week we're going back to 1960 for a romantic comedy drama called The Apartment, starring Jack Lemmon, Shirley MacLaine, and Fred MacMurray. And this is directed by, written by, and produced by Billy Wilder. So why did I choose a romantic comedy this close to Christmas? Well, this story ends up at Christmas time and finishes at New Year's Eve. So our story begins with an insurance clerk by the name of C.C. Baxter, played by Jack Lemmon. And Mr. Baxter works for an insurance corporation in New York City. Now, he wants to climb up the corporate ladder, so he ends up allowing his 4 managers to take turns borrowing his Upper West Side apartment for their extramarital affairs. Now, Baxter juggles his schedule at work, and since there's women coming in and out of there almost every night, his neighbors thinks he's quite the playboy. Well, Baxter gets glowing reviews from his 4 managers, and they submit it to personnel director Jeff Sheldrick, played by Fred MacMurray. Now, Mr. Sheldrick has a meeting with C.C. Baxter, and he also knows that there's a key floating around the offices for his apartment. So Mr. Sheldrick agrees to promote him on one catch, that he gets to use the key to his apartment for his own marital affairs, starting with that evening. And to make up for short notice, he ends up giving him movie theater tickets for that evening. So he agrees with the promotion, and he ends up having a crush on Fran Kubelik. And Fran Kubelik is the elevator operator, played by Shirley MacLaine. So with short notice, he asks her out for that evening, and she agrees, but she says, "I have a previous engagement. I'll meet you later at the theater." So they both agree, and the reason why she has a previous engagement, the engagement is with former fling Mr. Sheldrick. So Mr. Sheldrick says again that he's going to be leaving his wife, and makes his promises that she believes. So she ends up missing the theater and going over to C.C. Baxter's apartment with Mr. Sheldrick. But she doesn't realize that that's whose apartment that is. And of course, C.C. Baxter gets stood at the movie theater. So does Mr. Sheldrick make more promises about leaving his wife and leading Fran Kubelik on, only just to get her heart broken one more time? And does C.C. Baxter get pretty upset after getting stood up and want to forget about the whole situation? This movie went over really well in 1960, had a budget of $3 million, but it pulled in $24.6 million at the box office. And at the 1960 Academy Awards, it was nominated 10 times. It won 5 awards. It won Best Motion Picture, Best Director, Best Story and Screenplay, Best Art Direction, and Best Film Editing. Also, at the 1960 Golden Globe Awards, it won Best Motion Picture, it won Best Actor for Jack Lemmon, and Best Actress for Shirley MacLaine. It was also the 8th highest grossing film of 1960. In fact, Sight and Sound magazine listed the film as the number 14th greatest film of all time. In 2006, Premiere voted this film as one of the 50 greatest comedies of all time. The Writers Guild of America ranked the film's screenplay the 15th greatest ever. And there's a quote in the movie where Fran Kubelik says, "Shut up and deal." Well, the quote was rated the 100 best quotes by the American Film Institute. So, a little more history and a trivia question coming up next. This week, since our story hovers around an elevator operator, I thought it'd be neat to do some history on elevators and elevator operators. So skipping back to the mid-1800s, the height of a building was related to the construction materials they had at the time and how many flights of stairs people were willing to climb. Now that's why you didn't see many buildings above 7 stories. There were elevators back then. They were used in industry for transporting factory goods, but they were considered unsafe for passenger use. Now, concrete and steel came onto the scene in the late 19th century, so the demand for higher buildings was a little more possible, because in 1853, the Otis safety elevator was invented. It was invented to prevent the fall of the cab if the cable broke. Now, it was demonstrated in the Crystal Palace in New York, and the first passenger elevator was installed at 488 Broadway in New York City on March 23rd, 1857. Now, the Equity Life Building, completed in 1870 in New York City, is thought to be the first office building with passenger elevators. And by the 1900s, automated elevators were available, but passengers were reluctant to use them. Now, that all changed with an elevator operator strike in 1945. That changed things. They added the addition of an emergency stop button, emergency telephone, and an explanatory automated voice. Now, being an elevator operator required many skills back then. Manual elevators were often controlled by a large lever. The elevator operator had to regulate the elevator's speed, which typically required a good sense of timing to consistently stop the elevator level with each floor. In addition to their training for operation and safety, department stores later combined the role of operator with greeter, with tour guide, with announcing product departments, floor by floor, and occasionally mentioning special offers. Now, prior to 1929, most elevator operators were men. Although women in the United States had performed the same duty previously, in Japan, that all changed. They began doing the same operations as the male operators, including operating levers and closing elevator doors. As elevators became more automated, though, their shift changed to more being as greeting customers, advertising sales to customers, and making announcements. Now, in 2017, it was estimated that over 50 buildings in New York City used elevator operators, primarily in apartment buildings on the Upper East and West Side of Manhattan, and some buildings in Brooklyn. In modern buildings, elevator operators are still occasionally encountered. They are commonly seen in Japanese department stores in Japan and Taiwan, as well as high-speed elevator operators in skyscrapers, including the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, in monuments such as the Space Needle in Seattle, in the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and the CN Tower in Toronto. They employ elevator operators to operate specialized and high-speed elevators, discuss the monument, and help direct crowd traffic. Pretty neat. And I have a couple of trivia questions this week. Kind of interesting. Was there ever a stage adaptation made from this movie? And yes, there was. Burt Bacharach and Neil Simon created a musical adaptation called Promises, Promises. You probably remember the song from Burt Bacharach with the same name. It's opened in Schubert Theater in New York City on Broadway. It began in 1968 and finished in 1972. A second question, was there any of this film filmed near Christmas time? Yes, there was. Billy Wilder was pretty smart in directing. There's an office staff Christmas party in the movie, and Billy Wilder decided to film it on December 23rd, 1959, to give it more of a Christmas feel. And it sure did. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope to see you back next week.